So welcome everyone to ASA Australia Emerging Leaders workshop series. This is part 3 of 3 and it's a cracker. We brought together tonight 2 leaders in agriculture in quite different segmentations of the agricultural industry, I guess, but very relevant to each of you and your careers and ambitions and your contributions to the show movement broadly. Any of you that have attended prior know that this is a really candid session. We do record it and we do publish it on YouTube afterwards, but we want you to ask questions. Our guest speakers tonight are absolutely going to be sharing anecdotes with you from their own experiences being young leaders and young contributors to boards and committees in the rural and agricultural space. Our 2 speakers tonight, one comes very much from the world of shows in John Bennett. John has been a senior leader in his local show in Nowra as the president there. He is the vice president today of the Royal Agricultural Society of New South Wales. He's had senior leadership roles on the Royal Agricultural Society of the Commonwealth. And for several years, I think it was 6, John, was ringmaster of Sydney Royal. He also is the chair of the horse committee there. And you can imagine at the largest ticketed event in Australia, with probably the most horses that come together at any one time in a year, that is a job with a fair bit of pressure and certainly lots of opinions across the horse world. Anyone that's from horses will know that. And our second speaker tonight is the incomparable Anna Speer, who has just shaken up what an ag leader is meant to look like. She's been the COO of AACO. She is today the CEO of one of Woolworth's newest divisions called Greenstock. That's absolutely approaching things in a unique and innovative way when it comes to red meat consumption. Anna has been the CEO of Auctions Plus. She's been a former director of Agribusiness Australia, is a member of CSIRO Future Protein Mission. The list is huge. So we're so delighted to have these 2 speakers tonight giving us some of their insights on leadership. John, I'll hand over to you, but the question we ask everyone is, where did your committee journey begin?
Thanks, Lindsay, and thanks very much for having me. And hello to I see a few names there that I know, and Ed, I'm looking forward to coming to Adelaide show for the first time ever this Saturday. So looking forward to that. I have been involved with shows my whole life, and some of you who I know might have heard a bit of my story, but my dad was an Olympic eventer. And so to gain qualifications and experience to compete at the Olympics, we found ourselves as kids at shows every weekend with mum and dad. And I guess that's where my passion from shows came from. And I suppose I thought for a while that my direction was going to be similar to dad's, and that I might take a competition path and end up competing at shows more than running them. But I came off at Kiama show in the show jumping practice arena one day and broke my collarbone, and from that put me out of action competing for a while. And I found myself along at Nowra Show Society's meeting, and as many of you will know, a younger person turning up at a show society meeting, it's not too long before you get a job. So I was elected the vice president there, or junior vice president, I think at the time. So from there you end up senior vice president, and from there I ended up a fairly young president of our local show society by comparison to others. So from there, there was a Royal Agricultural Society of the Commonwealth conference held here in Australia in Albury. That was way back in 2004. And the Agricultural Societies Council contacted me and said, would I be prepared to put in an application to go to that, one of their funded positions, to go down there. So I went along and had the absolute time of my life. And I know a few of the names I see here have been to RASC events and will know what I'm talking about when I say how much fun you have at an RASC conference. So that really spurred my enthusiasm for the international show movement, and certainly the show movement here in Australia. So when I was there, I met lots of people from the RAS of New South Wales. That's always been hallowed turf as far as our family was concerned. That the councillors at the RAS were the pinnacle, and you bowed and whatever when you met them. I was invited to join the inaugural youth group at the RAS of New South Wales. They just formed the youth group a couple of months prior. And so I think I came on board. Susan Bauer, Susan Wakeford now, and I joined the RAS youth group on the same day. Interestingly, the entire contingent of that original youth group are now all councillors on the RAS of New South Wales. So that was a great experience. So I really sort of came from an ag shows or an ASC angle into the RAS of New South Wales. I always imagined it was probably the ASC that I'd make a contribution at, but ended up turning out that I became involved with the RAS. Then was elected to council there in 2009 to the horse committee. Noticed there'd be a few horse people there. Unfortunately, horse people don't tend to be the most proactive on show committees. My experience is it tends to be cattle people and everybody else that tend to put their hand up. Horse people are the last people often to stick their hand up, and I can say that as a horse person myself. So we need to encourage more of them to do that. And I also had then the invite to become more involved with the RASC. I became their next generation facilitator. I did that for a few years. I started the concept of the understanding and assistance missions, going to a developing Commonwealth country and helping them run a show there. So we did that in Zambia and in Papua New Guinea, in India, and then in Malawi, and the missions continue on now under the current NG facilitators. I still remain a trustee of the RASC. There you do a 3-year term. I did my 2 3-year terms, which were going to be up in 2021, and because of COVID, they've just changed the rules to do 3-year terms. So I've got one last 3-year term. I currently chair the conference subcommittee for the RASC. Our next conference will be in the UK in 2024, and I encourage all of you absolutely stick it in the diaries because it will not be to be missed. So that's where I started, Lindsay, and I guess now onto the leadership tips. So five leadership tips. Well, there'd be far more than 5 that I could say to you, and these are not. These are just the 5 that I came up with for today that I thought might be relevant. Now, the first one, and I hope you're not going to be disappointed that you've stayed up to 7:30 to listen to somebody to tell you that their first leadership tip is be on time. But a simple one, but honestly, it is amazing how many people just don't get that. And you turn up to a meeting and the chair doesn't start on time. Somebody said to me once a few years ago, you've got 15 people in a room and you start 2 minutes late. That is 30 minutes of time you have wasted. It's not 2 minutes, it's the cumulative effect, and that is 30. So nothing worse than a leader who is not on time and who doesn't start things on time. So I guess in hand with that one goes the whole concept of bending the rules on a committee or at a meeting. My dad always says, you don't bend the rules or the rules will bend you. And that's advice that I always cling to. Just so important. If the quorum says it's 5, you have to have the 5. And it doesn't matter what. And I learned that in particular being ringmaster at the Easter show for a term of 6 years there. And I hope that when I finished, I was known as somebody who was a stickler for the rules. If that's the case, I'd be very happy. The reality is you can't go wrong. You stick to the rules. And the ringmaster before me, Bill Pickett, I heard him say when I was assistant ringmaster a few times to people, look, mate, I don't make the rules. I'm just here to enforce them. And that's true. You can't go wrong when that's the case. And sometimes rules aren't right, particularly, show societies make all sorts of different rules for things that we do. And sometimes it's a matter of going back to the committee and you reconsider things afterwards. But if the rule is whatever it is at the time of the show, you need to, do what it says, and certainly don't make policy on the run is another thing that is not a good idea. My second piece of advice is to be organised when it comes to running your meetings. make sure you've read the papers. Nothing worse than people at meetings who haven't read the papers and who are wasting everybody else's time because they're not up to speed with what should be happening. If there's pre-reading sent out beforehand, absolutely have a look at it. And if not, best thing is to sit there and zip it up and don't ask too many questions that are clearly wasting everyone's time when everyone else has read beforehand and you're the one that's holding people up. I make sure that when I go to, I mean, particularly at the RAS, obviously we have a lot of meetings there and a lot of work is put in by the full-time staff at the RAS that manage things for us. And you can see when there's an enormous amount of pre-reading and papers being put together and how disappointing it is to somebody when they can tell that everyone sitting at this meeting hasn't even read what they put all that work into. So I always like to add a few post-it notes to what I've got so people can really see that you have taken the time to flick through, stick on a post-it note at various things that you want to ask about at the meeting. And with that is obviously ask good questions, but never to be the person that asks 1,000 of them. There's always that person at a meeting you come across, and sometimes it's I know in sometimes I get so passionate about whatever we're talking about that I want to ask 1,000 questions, and you have to really concentrate not to do that. My third piece of advice is to work on what you're not good at if it's something that's holding you back. And this, I originally was a petrified public speaker, and absolutely petrified. And nowadays, when I talk at various things, lots of people can't believe that could possibly have been the case. In actual fact, Lindsay, I was interested in your experience, whether your situation is that you were always had a knack for public speaking or a talent for it, or whether that was something that you perhaps had to work on as well. But certainly for me, I mean, I can remember at the first RASC conference I went to back in 2004 was in the auditorium in Albury there. And there was a question I was so petrified standing up in front of 120 people to ask a question of the guest speaker. It was just the worst ever. But to move through that and to, take bit by bit, and yeah, it's just been perseverance for me really with public speaking. So I say, not all leaders, I guess, are born leaders, but there's work to be done. The fourth piece of advice I've got is talk to your people, those that you're leading. It's all very easy to, particularly on show committees, there's always people we don't particularly get along that well with. And when you're leading a committee, it's easy to lead the ones that you like and not find that you relate too much to those that you maybe don't get along with so well. It's important on a diverse committee to ensure that you stay in touch with everybody, ensure you talk to the ones that you haven't got much in common with as much as the people that you do have things in common with. And it's amazing what a difference that makes to the efficiency of everything you're doing when the leader really makes a concerted effort to talk to more people. I used to do some work for our local federal MP here, who was an MP for 17 years she was a Liberal member. And I asked her at one time, I said, who was the best leader that you'd worked under? And she'd worked under a few. And she said, well, it's an easy thing for me to answer. John Howard has to be the best. And, of course, John Howard, was 4 terms as the leader. He wasn't challenged like many other leaders are and have been more recently. And I said, well, what was his success like? What was it about his leadership style? Because, and even for him, his party followed him into an election where he even lost his own seat. Like, that's how loyal they were to him as their leader. And she said, she said, every month at the whole time I was in Parliament with him as leader, he would ring once a month. And she said, that wasn't just to me, that was to every single MP. Now, for him to be in government, he had to have at least 75 MPs. And so he'd be, you know, in the car getting chauffeured here, there, or everywhere, and obviously have them all through the phone, and phone them up and say, "Yep, g'day, Joe. What's happening in your part of the world? What's going on?" And she said by doing that, he was always so connected with his people. He'd know if somebody was dissatisfied. He knew what was happening. He was absolutely had his finger on the pulse with every single one of those MPs. And I always think that, you know, really is a good thing to do, and just important. And even, you know, for me with the horse community, we've only got 10 of them. You know, it's easy not to stay connected to people. And when I do ring members of the horse community, they're always, "Oh, wow, thank you for calling." They're really happy that you would take the time to ring and ask, you know, is there anything that's troubling you at the minute? What's the biggest issue do you think we've got ahead of us at the moment? And to ensure that our meetings are being conducted in the right way. So that's a piece of advice there. My last one, number 5, is have fun along the way and don't take the whole thing too seriously. It's so easy to get wound up with, you know, the pressures of the show and, you know, how much, you know, whether we're going to make a financial profit at the end of the day or whatever. And particularly in the sphere of shows, the last thing lots of people really want to do is to, you know, leave the farm or the business or all the troubles there, take their night off and go away for a night and see a whole heap of more troubles at what is there. So, you know, certainly we need to take things seriously and we need to ensure that, you know, our organisations are viable, but not forget that there has to be some fun in it, and ensure that angle is in, you know, a bit of lightheartedness in meetings. I always try and make sure every meeting has some sort of lighthearted banter or something in it that, you know, a few people might have a chuckle about. With that, somebody said to me once when I was president of Narra Show, and I was determined to be the best president ever, and I, you know, put more work in, and a wise person came to me and said, "You need to make sure that you don't make this job so big that no one wants to take it on after you." And that's I felt a good bit of advice too. You can do such a good job that everybody else says, "I'm going to look bad if I take that on next, so I don't want to do it." So you have to be a bit measured. That was my 5. If I had have had a 4.5 before I had the 5, Lindsay, so I'm going to have a 4.5. The other thing I would say is find good mentors along the way. That's really something that I've done. No matter what committee I've been on, I've found that there are people who I've looked up to on those committees, and those people who've given me some absolutely fabulous advice along the way. So I've always been happy to listen to them, and, you know, I think back now of the various people that I've looked up to in committees that I've been on, and some of the wisest advice you possibly come across. So that's my 5 bits of advice.
That's so brilliant. Thank you, John. And we'll take questions from anyone who has them for you. We've got a few minutes to throw some questions your way. But one of the tips that I just wrote up, I sat on a board with a lot of wool growers for the last 2 years, and these were these big fat packs that came out every quarter, and so many people would just say, "I don't have time to come inside, print this out and go through it." And so I introduced a number of them to Speechify and Natural Reader. And it's where you can upload a PDF and it reads it to you. And if you can absorb information that way, which I can, and others can as well, it can be a really good way to get across the big issues in a paper and identify where you want to ask questions. And in answer to your question, yes, I absolutely have worked on my deficiencies as an announcer, with all sorts of courses and all sorts of education on, you know, breeds of cattle I'd never heard of before and how to pronounce. I know all about the Gelvies now. But yeah, so I do think that's one of those things where it's so important, particularly on a board. If you're on a show committee and you don't really understand a lot about finance, just upskilling a little bit on those sorts of things so that you can contribute in that space or at least not be left behind. But are there any questions for John?
I just mentioned there when you said, Lindsay, about the amount of paper you get being on a board. That's an important one, and particularly when you end up chairing the boards, like pre-reading the papers before they go out and trimming down. I mean, a good chair who's able to absolutely take an axe to board papers and ensure that what is going out is only absolutely what is necessary. There's nothing worse than opening up board papers and you've got 75 pages of pre-reading before a board member absolutely, does your head in when you look through it, and half of it could have been trimmed down. So, yeah.
John, in one of our early sessions, I'm going to ask a question unless anyone else jumps in. We talked a lot about introverts and extroverts and the responsibility of a chair to bring out all sorts of personalities to the table and make sure that there's robust discussion about the key agenda items. What do you do about conflict in a meeting room? Do you foresee it? What do you try to do if there's maybe someone taking over or bringing an issue to the table that is contentious that shouldn't be dealt with there?
It just depends, I suppose, in lots of ways on the exact situation. I got asked to chair a really contentious meeting for the RAS of New South Wales the other day. We were talking about potentially shifting the pigs from the pavilion they're in, and they share the pavilion currently with the goats. And then they were going to go into a pavilion where the animal nursery used to be, that is next door to where the milking dairy was, and the cattle committee were concerned that pigs being near to the milking barn was going to upset the cattle being milked, and there was all sorts of issues in that between all of the committees, and people were getting really sort of quite hot under the collar about it. So we decided to take it offline, have a subcommittee meeting separately about it. And one of the things there, I think it was important to phone the various parties beforehand and maybe sort of alert them. I guess I sort of pre-guessed some of the tough questions that different people were going to be asked and rang them before and sort of said, look, can you have a bit of a think about this and that? So nobody sort of felt that they were being blindsided on the day. And then I guess I sort of started by giving a preamble as to what the situation was, and then asked everybody not to jump in to start with. Lots of things I didn't get necessarily right, but to jot it down, and then everybody to have their say. So I think important to ensure, in a contentious meeting, everyone has the chance to get their say and that they've got the confidence to know that they will, but also to be firm when there's somebody who tends to start having too much of a say, to say, that's enough, we're moving on now. Chairing contentious meetings is a difficult one, and the personalities involved, there's all sorts of things come into it.
We had a really nice piece of advice on top of that from Catherine Marriott in our first session, and she gave the anecdote similar to yours, where she was bringing 5 different parties together that had rather acrimonious perspectives on each other and certainly did not share a view on a solution, but she got them to all agree on the problem they had to solve at the start of the meeting, and said that was a really useful tactic for making sure the meeting just kept moving forward so that they could leave with a resolution.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it comes down to, at the end of the day, it ends up as a vote, certainly at a committee meeting. Sometimes discussion's gone around the table and I can tell there's a variety of opinions here. So now we're going to put this to a vote and see, and you get a majority and then you move on. And, the reality is if it doesn't go your way, well, that's it. Better luck next time.
We had a great question just come in there from Laura Tacey, who's in Central Queensland. And Laura wanted to know, as a young person in those tougher conversations at meetings, and I'm guessing what Laura's really saying is, what if you get shut down because you've only just joined the committee or you're a young person and how could you know? And back in 1960, we did it that way and it works. What's a good way to have influence in those difficult conversations without upsetting people?
And that's such a big problem for us in lots of ways. And at the RAS of New South Wales, we have our honorary councillors, and the reality is for us, they just bring so much to the table. We would not be without them, because at 70 you stand down as an active councillor and you become an honorary. You can still come to meetings and talk, but you don't actually have a vote. But the reality is, what I've found over the years is, and gone home from so many meetings, so infuriated that I didn't get to say what I thought or what didn't come across. It's a matter of being prepared for the next meeting and try to plan something, really succinct that you want to say during the meeting, bring it up and put it across, and try and make it something that you can see the eyes around the meeting room look and think, wow, that was a really good point. And as soon as you kick a few of those goals, my experience is you find the next time you stand up to say something at a meeting, naturally people tend to be a little bit quiet and want to listen to what you've got to say, because I think, oh, actually last time he had a gem. So that might be what's going to happen this time. So it doesn't always happen at the first meeting, persevere with it, but try and find a gem that you can absolutely, where you see all the eyes at the meeting look at you and go, wow, that's a cracker of an idea.
Laura's just written fantastic, thank you. I love that. Go in considered about the points you want to make and make them at a time that where you're given the air to do it, as opposed to trying to take on the older generations who may have a lot more experience than you in that space. John, thank you so much, and please stay online with us. We're going to head over to Anna Speer's story now, and if there's a busier woman in Australia, I haven't met her. Anna, what was your first committee and what has your journey been with leadership roles in ag?
Thanks, Lindsay, and hi everyone. I think I'm probably a little bit different. I might look like an ag leader, but I must say I was never a showy, if that's even a real word. I was city-based for a lot of my childhood, with a little bit touching into the country, but it was always a space I was interested in, but never managed to really lean into it, like so many of you sound like you really are. With regards to my career on boards and committees, and the first one, to be honest, I can't actually remember the first one. But what I do remember is that I joined a lot of them because of a fear of missing out. And that's been a learning for me as I've got older, and had kids and become even more time poor, around how important it is to not just do something for the kudos or the tickets or the fear of missing out, and to be really, really clear around why you want to participate, and make sure it's not just your ego, and that you actually do have something to contribute positively to that board or committee, or group of any sort. And that's been a bit of a growth opportunity for me over the years. The other thing I remember about being on boards and committees back in the day, in the early days, was the frustration about not being heard, about people not understanding the full, what I thought the right opinion was, and spending more time during that meeting thinking about what I was going to say, heart pounding in my mouth, instead of only to semi-emotionally get my point out across the table, as opposed to spending the time really listening, being curious, and thinking. So I thought I'd just share that up front, because it's sort of a few of the things John said resonated with me in that space. My career, bit of a mixed bag. Started as a law science student, passionate about criminal law and forensic science. Thought I was going to be on CSI. Then did a bit of a career change pivot when I decided I didn't want to be a lawyer. Was a bit into McLeod's Daughters at the time, and went to the Northern Territory to chase cows. I then spent 6 years working on cattle stations, did a teaching degree, and started doing a bit of work in technology. And got a gig then across in Brisbane with a software company building traceability systems for red meat supply chains. Then got the Auctions Plus job, first time in a CEO role. And so one of the things I suppose that's a little bit different about me is I'm probably spending more time now thinking about what boards I'd like to be on, or how I set myself up so that I can pay it back. My experience and forte right now is in the operational space, and looking at how I build teams, transform supply chains, and do things a little bit differently, as Lindsay alluded to. After Auctions Plus, I went to AACO, which was hardcore operations, a large cattle company across Queensland and the Northern Territory. Bit of a boys' club, just a predominantly male environment, and I think I might have been one of the first female execs to hit the executive team there, and learnt hardcore operations. And then more recently, got the gig at Greenstock with Woolworths Group, which was sort of funny because when I got asked about the role, I said, "Why on earth would I want to work for a retailer? I've been on the other side of the fence my whole life, potentially throwing rocks at the retailers for not being good to the farmers and not giving us good farm gate prices." And then saw the opportunity to actually change from the inside. And I think with boards and committees and companies, change does come from the inside, and it's really easy to throw rocks from the outside. But when you actually get on the inside and start to look at how you can be a part of that change, I think that's really exciting. And so when I look at committees and boards now, and I don't have a huge amount of time, so John's number one piece of advice, and I was thinking it as you were all logging on to the call tonight, was you've got to be on time. You only ever get one first impression. And for those people that are time poor, and when you're stretched trying to do a lot of things, you don't have a lot of tolerance for people being late. Essentially, you go, well, that clearly wasn't important enough for them. Obviously, if something's happened, that's a different story. But being on time is just so critical. And so, yeah, now I'm with Woolworths in Greenstock, thinking about how do we reimagine pork, beef and lamb supply chains for a greener tomorrow or a better tomorrow. And what role do we play with industry, and how do we be good custodians for the future, but also still provide for our shareholders, the farmers, our processors, and everyone else, especially our customers, I suppose. Do you want me to dive into advice, Linz? Okay, and I'm happy for questions. Unlike John, I'm a little bit disorganized, and I'd say that it's one of my fortes. I go where I'm curious and what I'm passionate about, but per John's comments, be on time, do the pre-read, and shut up if you haven't done it. No one wants you to go and litigate stuff that you haven't actually read and the answers on page 3. Don't be noisy for the sake of being noisy. I think, and you'll see, I like my quotes, but an empty vessel makes the most noise. Just be quiet if you haven't done the readings. And it's probably what and we at Woolworths, they really don't tolerate it. And we have to read a lot of things before a meeting and be well prepared when we go into it. The next piece of advice I'd say has been a real learning for me. Be passionate and clear about why you're on a board or a committee. It shouldn't be about points or kudos. And I've learned that one the hard way. And for me, it's about how do you give back or make sure that you are actually contributing. The next rule would be listen. You've been given 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them accordingly. Be curious and ask really good questions. And a good question is not a statement. It's not so that means this, does it? That's not a good question. There's a saying around noses in and hands out. A board should be all about asking the right questions to find out the answer, but also to empower your team to step up and discover the answer themselves. The best boards I've ever reported into or dealt with over the years ask questions that you go, oh, wow, I had never even thought about that. And you leave the meeting with a bit of inspiration and excitement because someone's actually opened up a new way of thinking about things for you to move on with. They're not giving you the answer. They're not telling you what to do. They're thinking about how do they set you up for success. In these environments, it can be really tough, and I can only begin to imagine what some of the show and committee environments are like that you guys are in. And when I'm in an environment like that, I spend a lot of time thinking about how to be what they call an objective observer, or not attached to the outcome. Even when you are really, truly attached to the outcome, being able to just separate yourself from that and go with the flow. And what I found as I've got a bit older is often when you do that, particularly the people who are a bit hard-nosed about their opinion, you'll get a bend in them, because you're giving them the space. If you're coming in hard to just, counteract and say, no, that's wrong, you're going to get that same reaction back. Whereas if you sit back and you go, wow, that's really interesting, tell me a bit more about that. Why do you think that? Have you thought about any other ways we could do it? Obviously, without being condescending. Often, 9 times out of 10, you'll end up finding out that you're either fighting for the same common goal, but you've just framed it slightly differently, or you get the opportunity to share your opinion in a way that opens the door for someone to actually step across and change their mind. So you've got to manage your ego, and it's tough. It's really tough. So just thinking about how you get out of your own head and not assume what you think the other person is thinking is going on in their head. People first would be my next little piece of advice. And I think that's, for someone who is very operational, my team are the most important thing that I can spend my energy on. And I'd say 90% of my energy goes on team, 10% on, operations and managing the business. When you think about team, I think you've got to think about people first, but that includes yourself. And putting your own oxygen mask on first and making sure that you have the right balance, but also that you're role modeling the right balance, because it's very easy for you to talk the talk but not walk the walk. And when you're doing that, it actually makes you a really hard person to work for, because even though you're saying, yeah, I want you to have balance, no, I don't expect you to be responding to emails at ridiculous times of night. If you're sending those emails at that time of night, you are setting the expectation for people to copy you, particularly if you're a high performer. That's when you start burning people out. And I think, looking after your people authentically, even as John mentioned, the ones that you don't necessarily get along with or you think they're a bit different or weird, they're usually going to be the ones that, if you can get over that hump, that will create the diverse thought that will give you a better outcome every single day of the week. And that's whether that's gender diversity, people from different ethnicities, age diversity. Like, there's a reason why we've done things, particularly in the show world, for the past 100 years. Doesn't mean it can't be changed, but get curious, because if you just go and change it on the fly, as John said, you'll end up with a subpar outcome, as opposed to co-creating what the future could look like together. Another quote around people, and one that I've heard over the years, the fish rots from the head. You set the tone at the top, and that cascades down. And so I think if you have a team of people that are all doing the wrong thing, the first person you probably need to look at is yourself. Next piece of advice, I cheated because I didn't tell you which was 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6, because I like to have multiple options. But authenticity, humility, and I really think it's important to say it when you're feeling something, whether it's you're feeling upset, you don't understand, you want to understand something a little bit more. 9 times out of 10, most people in the room are thinking the same thing. Be brave and actually ask the dumb question, because usually it's actually the smart question. And then 2 last ones for you. If it was easy, someone else would already have done it. And I think particularly when you're dealing with a large committee of people with multiple ideas, of, coming from various places in life or at any point in time, it is tough. But that's, pressure makes a diamond. And as you work through that, you will get good options and outcomes if you're patient. And then the final one that I think is really important too, which sort of lends itself back to the start, which was around, make sure you know why you're getting on a board or a committee, is make sure you know who you're getting onto that board with, particularly the chair, if you've got a chair relationship, and who you're getting involved with and what their values and core purposes are, because very quickly those things can erode a situation or a relationship if they're not aligned. So that'd be me, Linz, in a nutshell.
Love it. No, that's brilliant. I've just done a bit of a call out for questions, but Anna and John, I also wonder if you could answer this. When you've been sitting on a board and there's been someone else in the chair or leadership position on a committee or on a project, what has good chairmanship/leadership looked like versus bad? Like, what are the tangible red flags and gold stars?
Do you want me to have first go, John? I think you touched on it a bit earlier on. So bad, disorganized, yabbering on something for way too long, and not actually getting to an outcome. So not managing time. I think a chair has a responsibility to keep the meeting moving, but also create space if a conversation needs to be had. A chair also has a really important role to having those one-on-one conversations outside of the board or the committee to give people feedback if they need support, pulling into line, getting flagged that, hey, John, it wasn't okay to turn up today and not read the board papers and then make a whole lot of noise. Can you have a think about that? Or perhaps you need to think about whether or not this is the right committee or board for you. Having that honest communication is really important. And then bad or red flags for me is not listening and railroading and essentially changing the rules as it goes. And in some ways, being a bit of a bully. That's just not on.
Thanks, Anna. We've got a question that's just come through for you, but John, you go ahead.
Yep, I agree with all of those that Anna said. Nothing worse than a chair that has too much to say themselves, and the meeting really just becomes an entire expose of everything that they think about the papers. A chair obviously has to judge when it's a good idea to give their opinion first, and when it's first of all a good idea to draw out the opinions of the meeting and then present theirs. And there's quite a knack in deciding which is best to do. And on some occasions, it's good to sort of direct the conversation by giving an opinion, particularly if you know that based on what you might say, that might then lead what others are going to say from there. But certainly ensuring that all persons on the committee or at the meeting feel that when they have something to say that they can actually get it out and have it heard and the opinion respected, and also a chair that will listen enough to realise even if their opinion has been in one direction and suddenly you realise that, I didn't think it was going to turn out like this, but the committee seemed to be majority of a different opinion, that you're willing to listen to that and respect and say, okay, committee, I've understood what you've said, and this is now our decision. But listening and ensuring that people feel heard at meetings, there's nothing worse than sitting through a meeting where you're just listening to someone else's opinion.
A monologue.
Completely.
Shelby has just written a great question, and actually probably I think both of you could tackle this. As young people on committees, you so often, as you say, John, gets thrown a ton of jobs straight away because you've got energy and enthusiasm and you're fresh. But Shelby's question is, what is your number one way to balance your work life? She is currently struggling with work, running her own business and volunteering with her show and other community organisations.
Good question, Shelby, and I hate to say it, guys, there's not a silver bullet to this one. There's days that I am the best mother, the best wife, the best employee, the best boss, the best community person that nails everything, and then there's other days when it just all goes to shit, excuse the French. And what I have learned, and this is still something I spend a lot of time working on, and I think I actually have got a lot better of it at late, is how do I carve out time for myself to nourish myself? And that nourishing myself doesn't mean hanging out with my 6-month-old and my 2-year-old, just because I'm feeling like a bad mum. Nourishing myself is actually having time for myself. So I try to religiously meditate for 20 minutes every morning. It's the first thing I do when I get up. I then try to get in a little bit of exercise. I'm really fortunate that my husband is the main parent in our partnership, and he does an amazing job, but it's been a really interesting thing for us to work through. We have a lot of conversations around how we make sure each of us gets what we need to look after ourselves. And by doing that, I think you then manage to get your priorities right. And by priorities, I think it's really important to know what to say no to. I'm a yes person. If you want my time, like I'm sitting here and it's 8:18. I've been in meetings since about 6 o'clock this morning. And Lynn said, can you come do this? And I was like, absolutely, I can do it. And this is something I actually really do enjoy doing. And the reason I said yes is I actually get a real kick out of talking to people and sharing a bit about my leadership journey in the hope that it helps them. But I also really just enjoy chatting to people. So I know this is something that will energize me. I do say no to things a lot more now, and then I plan out my diary. And my assistant actually chunks, like 3-hour chunks, a couple in the week. That's just think time. So I think that's really important. The other thing you got to do is give yourself a break. I have a coach that, you know, when things all get a bit dark and I get upset over something, I'll call her and say, you know, it's all the little chicken little, the whole world's falling apart. And she'll go, what's wrong? And she says, well, what are you cross about? And I'm like, oh, I'm cross at myself. I haven't managed to do this, this, and this. And she'll go, okay, but what have you managed to do? And, you know, suddenly you're listing off, you know, a washing list of all these things that you've successfully achieved. You've got to give yourself a break. You can't be everything, and ask yourself why. Sometimes I think you feel like you need to be. For me, I have a real fear of failure, and I've almost my superpower is overdrive, but you know, it gets me to where I am today, but it actually will be my undoing at the same time. So reflecting on that, I think is really important. John?
I agree absolutely with what you say, Anna, that learning to say no is so important. That's so hard. I don't do that well at all. I end up agreeing to lots of things that, and then you take too much on and you don't do justice to what you have taken on. So learning what to say no to is just so important. But an elderly gentleman on the RASC said to me a few years ago, and was one of those people who I was talking about before, as a mentor, and I was complaining about how many committees I was on, how much I was doing, how busy I was, and he simply said to me, John, the more you do, the more there is to do. This is no secret. And that was just that. So the reality is, ask a busy person if you want something done. So busy people will tend to be busy, and I guess we just manage it and organise it.
John, I had a very dear friend of ours say to me the other day, Lindsay, you've taken on too many shows, and you're probably about to stop enjoying your life so much. And it was the conversation I needed to hear to be brave enough to start to sort of wind back a little bit. But we've got a question from Rebecca Blanford, and Rebecca, I'm hoping you'll turn your camera on and give it to us verbally.
Hi, I'm Beck. I'm from Orange. John, you mentioned earlier about being a stickler for the rules. I'm hoping that you both might be able to answer this question, but have you ever been in a committee where they don't stick to the rules? And I guess as a young person, how do you influence the change to make the rules best practice?
Yeah, that is a good question. And yeah, absolutely, certainly been on committees and been in situations, certainly often chairs won't necessarily conduct a meeting according to sort of, and you'll think, well, look, you know, perhaps we should have taken a vote on this, or perhaps a decision's been taken that didn't seem to be quite right. I'm one always that likes to read the rules of what it is that I'm involved with, and there's all sorts of different structures of all sorts of different organisations, but it's important to know how what you're involved with should be conducted, or what the rules are. And then there's always a respectful way of, and it's not always at the meeting, but sometimes it might be after the meeting and not in public and in private. You might say to the chair, look, can I just ask, you know, regarding how the meeting went today, you know, and you can do that in a genuine and a respectful way. That is sometimes pulling somebody up in the middle of a meeting in a public way, that doesn't tend to be the best way to deal with things in my experience. But yeah, ensuring that we stick to the rules, it's important.
We just got a great question through from Nat Hodgson that says, and John, you might be good to take this first. What would you recommend as a good way to manage a disorganised chairperson? How infuriating that must be, Nat.
I'm not sure I've got the silver bullet for that one, unfortunately. I think we've all been in that situation and experienced a disorganised chairperson. And I guess subtle hints is sometimes the best way to try and encourage the chair to be more organised. And sometimes it's just a matter of battling it out for however long that term is, whether it's 12 months or whatever, until the organisation makes a better decision next time. But certainly you can offer polite advice to all sorts of people, and sometimes they just frustratingly don't take it.
I think the only other build on that one is they're part of the solution. Like sometimes those people, they need a bit of support. I'm a disorganized person. I won't turn up to a board meeting disorganized, but I'll surround myself by people who are organized, and that they can help with the framework around what I need to do. So if it drives you mad, lean in there and help set them up for success so you don't have to deal with it.
Love that. That was certainly my experience chairing a board for the last couple of years with people that were turning up in the opposite role, people that were turning up disorganized. What can I put in place? So is it a phone call 7 days out and another one 3 days out? Is it touching with them on topics that are in the board pack? Is it giving them tools like the audio reader so they've got other ways to get around it? I mean, just kind of throwing options at them to give them an opportunity to succeed. Before we leave tonight, John, we had a couple of people question after you mentioned the RASC, what is this next event? Where is it at? How do they get involved? I think there's a lot of interested people here.
Yeah, for sure. Great to hear. Stay connected with your Australian-based organisations, be that your state rural shows, your agricultural societies, councils within your state, but also the website of the RASC's simply ws.therasc.com. Go to that. Interesting website to have a bit of a look through if you don't know much about the RASC, but basically the Commonwealth umbrella organisation where shows get together once every 2 years for the biennial conference. The next one will be in the UK 2024. It'll coincide with the Royal Highland Show. We'll spend, this is all very preliminary and you're actually getting this information hot off the press before others, but in any case, the plan is a couple of days at the Royal Highland Show, followed by a charter train trip to London, and then a couple of days in ye old London town. So absolutely cracking conference. We're potentially going to collaborate with another organisation. Princess Royal's president of the RASC. She's also president of an organisation called the Commonwealth Study Conferences, which is big end of town business leaders from across the Commonwealth and their emerging next generation leaders as well. So we're looking to collaborate with those and get some really big ticket item speakers at that conference. So watch this space, June 2024. There'll be sponsored positions for next generation from the societies, but also if you're passionate enough, put your hand in your pocket and go across. And I've done that a couple of times myself. It's worth every penny.
Thank you so much, John. If everyone's comfortable to turn their cameras on or at least turn their mute off, we just want to give a bit of an applause to Anna and John for being so generous and candid tonight with all of their advice from their vast experiences. Didn't quite have the effect I was hoping, but anyway.
Not at all. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
It's so special to finish on with two great leaders on our leadership topic, and on behalf of all the oldest of all the young people I think on here, but on behalf of all the young people that are involved with shows, Agricultural Shows Australia, thank you for the great work you're doing supporting our future leaders in this space. There's so much to be gained from being involved with shows, and we know that this is one important step in giving people the confidence and the competence to go and make huge waves in agriculture broadly, but also in the show. Anyway, we're going to let you all go and have a great night. Thank you for joining us. And for those of you that missed it, it'll be on YouTube in a couple of days.